that on?
Yeah, it is.
Chief, how many years ago was Shen founded?
The first meeting was in September 1998.
98.
98.
All right. Almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago. And when we had our small groups meeting yesterday, I found myself talking about Shen, but really talking about sheep. And I want to take this opportunity to say that Shen has been carried forward and become what it has become today due to one person, and that's Shiv Talwar. I mean, it's just remarkable to see what he has done and how steadfast he has been in realizing that vision that began 18 years ago. So, Shiv, it's a real honor for me to be here. So, today I want to talk a little bit about three Christian mystics: Hildegaard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, and Teresa of Avila. And it's not accidental that I've chosen to speak about these three women mystics. There was something said earlier this morning about recovering the feminine. And I don't think it's accidental that, to my mind, the greatest figures in the history of mysticism within Christianity are all women. The men, even the great Meister Eckhart, when I read him, he's too much the philosopher who's caught within the sort of template of rationality as the way into the discovery of the truth of the divine. Whereas in these remarkable women, we've encountered something very different than what we normally encounter in Christian thinking. And it's, and I need to say too that in terms of my own training and background, the mystics came very, very late. When I began my studies in the field of religion in 1961, mystics were dismissed, if we even ever mentioned them. They were the ones who obfuscated the truth of the tradition, right? They were flaky. They were mystifying. They were somehow less than what they should be, right? And one of my teachers reminded me many, many years ago that when we're dealing with religion, and especially when we encounter the language of religion, that we have to not see it as science minus, but we should rather see it as poetry plus. That there's something else going on in the way the mystics express themselves and articulate something that's very, very important And what they're trying to communicate to us is something of their experience of the divine. It's not trying to persuade you of some abstract idea. They're sharing with us what they have learned out of their own experience of following a particular path that was theirs. This morning, someone said they weren't on the right path. Use the phrase, there's no right path. And I said to her after, my view is that there are 1,000,001 right paths, right? That they're all unique, distinctive to who is walking that path. And in these three figures, I think we see something of that right path, which is an experiential path, which they're trying to share with us. I never know how to work these things. One of the first things I want to say is that when we talk about the divine in any tradition, one of the first things that is said about the divine in every tradition is that it is ineffable. And what does that mean? It means it always exceeds us. It exceeds our capacity to give expression to that in words. So what does that tell us about how words function within the context of the mystic? And I would say in a simple way that it means that words are to be taken symbolically, and that is as pointers towards something that really always exceeds our capacity to capture it in words. There's that Buddhist story about the person standing pointing to the moon and the viewer thinking that what he's doing is showing us his finger rather than the moon towards which he is pointing. And I think that's the perfect kind of analogy for understanding what the mystic is trying to do. They're trying to point us to something. They're trying to shift our attention so that we do see the world in a different way and at the same time a truer way. The deepest, the most profound, the most meaningful things always exceed our conceptions. And so when we shouldn't talk about a concept of mysticism, okay? It's not the concept of mysticism that's important. It is what mysticism, the mystics are trying to point us to. We can say, as with Pascal, the heart has reasons that reasons cannot express, that reason cannot express. The language of the heart is symbolic. Intuition always exceeds conceptual reasons. And mystics speak and write about that which is, in a sense, ineffable. That's the interesting contradiction and or tension within the life of the mystic. As I said before, when we're dealing with mysticism, we're dealing with the human being's direct experience or consciousness of ultimate reality, and it's an immediate, direct, intuitive experience of the divine. It is in God that we live and move and have our being, said Paul, a first century tent maker. We know him by other terms. God hugs you. You are encircled by the arms of the mystery of God. Now, mystery is another term that's very important and often occurs in relation to mystics. And what does a mystery mean? What does this term mean? We often use this term in a way that's very dismissive, that I think I've heard it repeated many, many times, that someone has a question and someone has some doubts about their faith and they're wondering and they go to their religious authority and the authority responds, well, that's a mystery, you just have to believe it. No, that's not what the word mystery means. The word mystery arose as a way of identifying a kind of problem we have in terms of trying to speak about the divine. A mystery is that we know more than one thing to be true, but we don't fully understand the relationship between those truths. And so that's the mystery, to try to understand simultaneously how, say for example, in Christianity, how God can be the creator, the redeemer, and the consummator. And we insist that this God is one, and yet it sounds like we're speaking about three. Okay? And Christians will always insist, no, we're not speaking about three, we're just speaking about one. Well, how do you, okay, that's the mystery in the sense that we can't adequately explain the relationship between those affirmations if we see them separately. But we know we don't want to say that God is three. Okay? Something like that. God hugs you. You are encircled by the arms of the mystery of God. Okay? Does God have arms? Of course not. But God is very close to us. Yes. And this is really interesting in relation to Hildegaard of Bingen because God is present to us through creation itself. There's no one who is not in relation to the divine, because everything is in God, everything is from God, and everything goes to God. Now, if you don't know that, that's another issue. But for the mystic, this is not a question, this is just the way things are. May you trust God that you are exactly where you are meant to be and what you are meant to be, a child of God, Teresa of Avila. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. The words of Julian of Norwich. So, first person I want to spend some time talking about is, there are many others that I could speak about, is Hildegaard of Bingen in the 12th century. She's an abbess, a writer, a composer, a theologian, a mystic. All creation is a song of praise to God. All creation is a song of praise to God. God hugs you. You are encircled by the arms of the mystery of God. God cannot be seen directly. God is known through the divine creation. Love abounds in all things, excels from the depth to beyond the stars, is lovingly disposed of all things. The Word is living, being spirit, all burdened greening, all creativity. The Word manifests itself in every creature. The earth is at the same time mother. She is mother of all that is natural, all that is human, for contained in her are the seeds of all. This is the language of universality. It's not that as if she's speaking only for Christians or for a particular community. She's speaking about what she sees as the truth of the human condition, right? This is our situation. The earth is at the same time mother, and she uses that language of mother to speak about the divine creation. One of the first persons to do this, but when we look at this language of mother to speak about the divine in Julian of Norwich, we have some surprising twists on this language of mother. I just want to say one more thing about Hildegaard of Bingen. And I want to read to you something that is found in her book called Divine Works. And in Divine Works, you have a picture. So I have that picture here. There it's, this is one of the pictures I'm thinking. This is another of the divine creation. And for the second picture, we have an image. We have this image. And here is the text that goes with that image. And this will give you a somewhat different view of the second person of the Trinity, or of Christ. And here's what she writes. And this is about the cosmic Christ. I, the highest and fiery power, have kindled every spark of life with wisdom. I have rightly put the universe in order. I, the fiery life of divine essence, am a flame beyond the beauty of the meadows. I gleam in the waters, and I burn in the sun, moon, and stars. With every breeze, as with invisible life that contains everything, I awaken everything to life. The air lives by turning green and being in bloom. The waters flow as if they were alive, unless I remain hidden in every kind of reality as a fiery power. For I am life. I also reason, which bears within itself the breath of the resounding word through which the whole of creation is made. I breathe life into everything, for I am life, whole and entire. I am life that remains ever the same, without beginning and without end, for this life is God. That's the words of a mystic who affirms the divinity of creation itself. And Hildegaard, in her lifetime, corresponded with all the leading figures in her world. Bernard of Clairvaux, she wrote and chastised popes. She challenged kings. She composed music. She grew things. Hers was a kind of language that exceeded the calm, detached, and ordered essay or theology, but it grew out of her own experience of life, and for her, the language or the let's say, conceptions that characterize the Christian faith are simply pointers to aspects of life that we all experience and know. And she, to express that, draws upon the language of her own Christian tradition. But it reveals that aspect of the Christian tradition that is always pushing towards the transcendent, the universal, the inclusive, the real, the actual. Okay, so that's enough. I mean, that's not enough, but that's what I'm going to stop with Hildegaard. And I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about Julian of Norwich. Comes a couple of centuries later, 1342 to 1416, during the time of the Black Death and the plague in Europe. And when she was an anchoress. What's an anchoress? An anchoress is someone who builds a little hut attached to the cathedral as her place to live. And so she lived in a little hut that's attached to the cathedral in Norwich in England, and is one of the first people to write her revelations of divine love in English rather than in, like typically for medieval writers, everything would have been written in Latin, right, because of the language. And her experience is these, what she called in the original publication, simply showings. These were kind of experiences that she had during a deep illness, where she wasn't really expected to live. She did survive, and then she spent the rest of her life sort of trying to articulate her experience that you find in the book, The Revelations of Divine Love. So there's a shorter version and a longer version, because she did one, and then she spent the rest of her life still sort of reflecting on this, and so on and so forth. And has a second edition. Often her view is summed up in these words: all shall be well, for there is a force of love moving through the universe that holds us fast and will never let us go. Lady Julian of Norwich. And that's a replica of that small church and cathedral in England that belongs during the backwards. Okay. It's going backwards. Okay, and what I wanted to specifically talk about in relation to Julian of Norwich is her notion of what I would call the Living Trinity, and specifically her use of the word mother. Because I had heard that Julian of Norwich was one of the first early people in the history of Christianity that spoke about God as mother. And I taught for years, of course, on the history of Christian thought from the 1st to the 20th century. And so I thought I better take a look at what Julian had said about this. And I was absolutely flabbergasted when I actually read this text. Because when she's talking about the motherhood of God, she continually refers to Jesus. And she says, he. And I said, what is going on here? How is Jesus our mother? Well, her explanation of that is that she says that during her, she doesn't refer specifically to her period of illness, but she refers to her visions during that time, where she realized that God had three properties. She called them God's fatherhood, God's motherhood, and God's, I'm going to use the term spirithood, or completion and fulfillment. And these she speaks about in relation to the three persons of the Trinity. And it's interesting, this term persons that's used in relation to the Trinity. You know what the meaning of that term is in the context in which the Nicene Creed was created? Persona is the term that the Greeks used in relation to plays that were performed, and it's the mask that is held in front of the face of the actor and through which his voice comes. That's a person. That's the term person. Okay? And I think, of course, we think about a person, you think, well, all of you sitting here are persons, right? That's not what it was meant there. It's almost like a kind of manifestation of the divine that comes through a particular face or a particular mask. That's the sense of which is speaking. Anyway, I saw and understood that the high, mighty, the Trinity is our Father, and the deep wisdom of the Trinity is our Mother, and the great love of the Trinity is our Lord, The second person of the Trinity is our Mother, working in us in various ways. He reforms and restores us, and through the gifts of the grace of the Holy Spirit, we are fulfilled. As truly as God is our Father, so truly is God our Mother. And when he's speaking about our Mother, he's speaking about Jesus in this role of redeeming and transforming our lives, because this is her way of characterizing the motherhood of God. The motherhood of God. So it's not about gender, and thankfully, because, I mean, who wants to characterize the divine in gender terms? We want to characterize the divine in terms of the divine's own character rather than the human kind of expression that we encounter in our everyday gendered and ungendered life. So it's an astonishing thing that Julian has done, and really sort of gives you a different kind of way of thinking about motherhood other than in simple gender terms. Okay. The third person, and again, that's very, very brief, but who knows, we might have another sort of hiatus here or something, so I better get this finished. The third person I want to take about, okay, 5 minutes. Spanish woman mystic, the Carmelite nun and author of The Interior Castle, written for her sisters in the order. And quite simply, I mean, in some ways, Teresa of Avila is my favorite of the three, because her book is so accessible. It's a different kind of text. And my feeling is, as I read it, that I'm listening to the voice of a woman who has spent her life with other women in the order, and she's just giving them good advice based on her own experience and her own journey. And in her book, she really takes you through sort of 7 stages of the journey towards kind of union with God. And it's a very, very, I find it very moving. I find it very fascinating. I also find it challenging, but illuminating of the various stages of the journey towards God. And I could say many, many things about her, but what I'm just a couple of things. She emphasizes the importance in that first stage of the journey on the interior castle is the importance of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge, that we need to know ourselves, and we need to know ourselves as, first of all, a child of God, and second, that we are also people who have missed the mark, which is typically the way in which sin is defined within the Christian tradition. But nevertheless, she always reminds people that wherever it is that you are exactly where you are meant to be in terms of your spiritual journey. And that by describing these different stages in that journey, it helps you to sort of understand that where you are, and it helps you, it gives you kind of reassurance that wherever it is you are, you're fine, right? Just stay with it, don't give up, keep at it, you know, it's that kind of advice. It is foolish to think that we will enter heaven without entering into ourselves, and that's really the critical theme of the beginning stage, because she talks at various stages about how you feel abandoned, how you go through the dark night of the soul, how you go through things where you feel like you've been left by God rather than you're moving closer to God. And of course, in her story, the final stage of this is union with God. And she uses the image of spiritual marriage in order to speak about the relationship between the soul and the divine at this highest stage. So, these are but three figures in the history of Christianity that are filled of, I think, sort of marvelous teaching and insight, wisdom. I think that's the word we want. Wisdom about the spiritual journey and about the way in which we find ourselves and understand ourselves and can see ourselves in the human journey towards the divine. So, thank you very much.
First and foremost, a sincere apology for the amount of interruptions. I personally would like to just sit and hear this one more time.
Maybe we should.
A little more time.
Maybe we should.
Well,
we should organize something like that.
If we have to, I'd certainly like to listen to this. Is a wonderful presentation, and thank you so much. Darrol, one of the things about Darrol is it's not on the slide, but he's traveled the world. He's been involved with several. We've got some questions. I'm sure there's some questions in here. Anybody got any questions for Joe? Okay.
Thank you. A number of years ago, and I don't know how many now, I attended. It was a 2-day workshop, and it was on Teresa of Avila going through the 7 stages, and the person was working at what we were doing through also a Buddhist meditation process. And I was wondering, Darrol, if you've done any work at all around that, because it would be, I do have a basement, so I'm sure I've got the notes. But I think that too, it was a very, for me, at the time, it opened me up also to be able to see Christianity in a very different way, because I was being trained at that time very much within the Buddhist context of meditation. So I was just because I was thrilled at the time about her 7 stages.
I thought about beginning today with a number of different possibilities, right? And one of them I was thinking about was a story that goes out of someone by the name of Father Henri Lassalle, who goes to India in 1948, and he becomes known in India as Swami Abhishektananda. And you won't know this, but she mentioned earlier someone by the name of Raimundo Panikkar. He was a teacher of mine, and a very important person who spent a lot of time in India. And when he came back from India, he went there when he was in his 30s, and he came back from India. And he said when he went to India, he recovered his Hindu heritage, became a Buddhist without ever having ceased to be a Christian. Okay? And it's something that I sort of, and Father Lasso, when he went to India, he was very, very moved by what he encountered in terms of Indian spirituality and spent his time trying to see the relationship between this Hindu Christianity or Hinduism and Christianity. And when he met Swami Chidananda, who was a very well-known yoga master and meditator, in their first meeting, I always love this story. They came into each other's presence, they bowed to each other, and then they both broke into laughter. Right? And there are all these sort of stories about the meeting of people from one or another tradition and how they respond to each other. And I think one of the things that Raimundo Panikkar always said that stuck with me is that when you meet people in the different traditions, if the people for whom interfaith dialogue is not a problem are those who are most deeply rooted in a particular tradition. They don't have any problem with the fact that people have beliefs different than theirs, because they're meeting where they respect the experience of each other, and then they're able to converse with each other and learn from each other. And I had told you, I think that, well, he mentioned, we have this seminar on practice of compassion. This largest group there were Buddhist. It was, well, actually only 2 Christians, there were Hindus, there were Sikhs, there were Jains. No problem for us to encounter one another and to sort of learn from one another, because there's not any, there's no fear. There's no fear. That's what it is. There's no fear. Anyway, long answer.
Are you going to
Wonderful
be-
answer. Wonderful answer. If I can ask Vicky, if you would basically just thank our speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bryant, on behalf of Shannon and everybody here for sharing this wonderful wisdom and insights and inspirational Christian mystics. So thank you just